Okay, so this lesson is adding and subtracting integers. One thing I like about this handout is it gives you some different ways to look at adding. So here they do a number line, so I'm going to do the example number 1 right here. I'll do this in red. So I'm going to draw a number line up here, and all you do, this is where you start. So I'm going to put 6 here, and then it says add 3. That means I go to the right 3. So I add 1, 2, 3 more. If I do that, that takes me to 9. That's where I end up. So 6 plus 3 is 9. Very easy way of adding on a number line. Now, where that becomes useful is when we are dealing with negatives. Whenever you add a negative, then you go to the left. Okay, so let's take number 4 for instance here. So number 4, where do I start? I start at -5. Then I go to the left, again because it's a negative, I go to the left 2. So 1, 2, so if I go to the left 2, that takes me to -7. That's where I end up, and that would be the value. Now it gives another way here talking about absolute values, but really all we're talking about here is whenever you add, remember if the signs are opposite, you subtract and keep the sign of the larger. If the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. Okay, so let's look at an example here again. So I'm going to do number 7 with you. Here we are adding, and they are the same. Now, again, you could do a number line, and I'll do that here in just a second, but I'm going to do the rule. The rule is when they're the same sign, you add and keep the sign. What's 5 plus 9? 5 plus 9 is 14. You keep the sign, so that would be -14. If you think about it on a number line, so I'm going to draw it right down here, you start at -5, and then I go to the left because it is a negative. I'm adding a negative, so I go to the left, and I would go to the left 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then all I would do is count. So if I count, this is -6, -7, -8, -9, -10, -11, -12, -13, and -14, which is the same thing we got here. So here's one where the signs are different. So what's the rule? When you have different signs, you subtract. So 5 minus 2 is 3, and keep the sign of the larger number. The larger number is positive, so that would be a +3. Again, you could do a number line. Where do you start? You start at -2. Then you go to the right, because you're adding a positive. You go to the right 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you count. -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. The same thing we got here. Okay, so these are just some other examples. So what I would like for you to do is try to work through these, and then we'll just keep continuing on with the other examples they have here. So they're just trying to change the problems up. Now we'll get a lot of practice with this with the homework, but just trying to show you some different things. So here we have subtraction. Now, one of the things I always teach, there is no such thing as subtraction. There is only adding the opposite. So if I were looking at this problem, I wouldn't look at it as 4 minus 7. I would look at it as 4 plus a -7. Why? Because if I think in terms of the number line, negative means I go to the left. So I start at 4 and go to the left. Or if you want to apply the rules, when they're opposite signs, you subtract and keep the sign of the larger. So again, I would come down here and I wouldn't say 5 minus 2. I would say 5 plus a -2. Subtract, that's 3. The sign of the larger is positive, so that would be a +3. Okay, what happens when you have two negatives? So if you had Miss Dalton, You remember she always used the words change, change. And I teach the same thing. Whenever you have two negative signs beside each other, you're going to do change, change. So really this problem now becomes negative 4 plus 7. So now we're right back to what we did at the up above. Opposite signs, you subtract, keep the sign of the larger, and that would be a positive 3. So down here, we do change, change. So that's negative 3 plus 5. So you keep the sign of the larger, which would be positive. 5 minus 3 is 2. So it's just a continuation of the same thing, subtracting a negative, so we're going to go to the next examples. So we're just continuing with what we just said. Two negative signs beside each other, change, change. So now it's really negative 4 plus 7. Opposite side, subtract, keep the sign of the larger, so now we have 3. So hopefully right now you're getting the idea, whether you do the rule, do the number line, but it's still very, very similar. And we just keep going. And then we have ideas of where we use negatives, and we talked about this in class about sometimes negatives can be represented in real life with temperatures. So here's an example of a temperature problem. Now let's do one down here. Let's talk about the football problem, because here's an example where we have negatives. Craig carried the football 2 times for a total of negative 2 yards. Not very good. He carried the football for 3 yards on his first carry. So I'm going to treat this kind of like a number line. So 3 yards on his first carry is in the positive direction, or to the right. So 1, 2, 3. What is the number of yards that Craig carried the football on his second carry? So remember, we ended up with negative 2 yards. So I have to end up over here at negative 2. So if I'm right here right now, I got to get all the way over there. So what happened? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I went 5, but I went to the left. So that tells me his second carry was for negative 5 yards. Another way to think about it is, if you want to do an equation, he went positive 3 yards his first carry, plus x, his second carry, it's what we're trying to find, has to equal negative 2. So a basic equation, subtract 3 from both sides. And when we do that, we get x is, and then right here, we have the same sign. Negative 2 minus 3, when they're the same sign, the rule is add and keep the sign. So we get negative 5, which is the same thing we got up here counting. So hopefully that helps you a little bit with adding and subtracting integers.